After high school, I decided to move out of my parents' house. So I rented a small apartment on the other side of our big city, and I found a part-time job at a local coffee shop. This was my first job ever. I worked as a barista. Luckily, my coworkers were super friendly. One of them is Caleb. He didn't speak much, but he stared at me all the time. He also worked as a barista. One day, when we were making coffee, I was telling him my concerns about college. I waited for his response, but he just stared at me for a whole minute before saying, "You have the best smell ever." I just laughed and walked away awkwardly. Since then, I started to notice how weird he is, so I tried to keep my distance. One day after a late night shift, I got to the parking lot, got inside my car, and reversed it. Suddenly, I hit something. My heart dropped. I rushed to see what had happened, and there I saw Caleb, lying on the ground holding his leg. I panicked and didn't know what to do, so I jumped in my car and drove home, leaving him on the ground. I was terrified by what I did. I didn't help him. The next day at work, I hoped that he wouldn't realize that I was the one who hit him. But Caleb looked at me with a smile on his face. I was confused. Then he came close to me and said, "It's okay, Mila. I know you were scared and terrified. That's why you didn't help me." My heart stopped. He knew. Then he continued, "I forgave you. I'm happy as long as you are safe. And I only got a few bruises. No biggie." I was shocked by Caleb's response. I asked him what he was doing there behind my car. He said he wanted to make sure I arrived safely because it was late at night. He was so polite, and it made me feel bad about how I treated him before. I stopped avoiding him, and we slowly became friends. But at the coffee shop, I started to notice there was a cute customer sitting in the same spot every day, and he never took his eyes off me. I blushed and smiled at him. However, he never approached me. After my shift, I was walking to my car and I heard footsteps behind me. When I looked, I saw a dark figure. I panicked and ran as fast as I could. I could hear him getting closer, but I just ran until I lost him. The next day, when I arrived at work, I heard there was a big fight inside. When I walked in, I saw Caleb beating the cute customer I saw the other day. The manager came in and apologized to the guy and then told Caleb to take the day off. When I asked Caleb why he did it, he said that the guy was stalking me. I was confused. Was he the one who followed me last night? Caleb explained that he had been watching him since he noticed his weird behavior. When he heard him today on the phone saying he was going to find out where I live, he couldn't hold it in and he beat him. But I didn't expect that Caleb would go that far to protect me. From that day on, he insisted on walking me home and making sure that I got there safely. After he walked me home a couple of times, I decided to invite him inside. We sat and talked for hours. Then it happened. We kissed and slept cuddling each other. After that night, he would stay at my place, often watching movies or talking. I started college after 1 week, and what I saw there made my jaw literally drop. The same guy from the coffee shop. He was holding a bag. He looked at me, and I immediately turned my face and walked away. I decided not to tell Caleb since I was afraid that he might go after the guy again. I kept seeing the guy at college for the next few days. He didn't seem like a bad guy after seeing him closely, so I decided if he ever comes again to talk to me, I'll give him a chance to explain himself. And it happened. He smiled at me as usual. I didn't turn my face and smiled back at him, which encouraged him to approach me and start the conversation. He said, "Hi, Mila. I'm Dan. Well, I know your name from the tag on your apron." Then he continued, "I didn't mean to bother you or anything, but I like how you always look so calm and friendly. But your coworker is scary. He beat me for no reason." I told him that Caleb thought he was creeping on me and he did it to protect me. I assured him that Caleb is a good guy. After this conversation, I saw him daily at college, and I discovered that we had some mutual friends. I enjoyed his company, but didn't tell Caleb anything. After a month, the exams period started. I invited Dan and our mutual friends to have a study group at my place. This happened a couple of times. After each meeting, Dan was the last to leave. We sat together and chatted for a couple of hours. We flirted with each other, and we even kissed. I liked Dan, and also liked Caleb, and I wasn't ready to choose or to become intimate with one of them, so I decided to leave everything as it is. At work, I took a late-night shift since I was busy with college, and on my way to the car, I felt as if I'm being watched again. I texted Caleb and asked if he could come. I was so afraid to go home alone that night. He replied that he will be there in 10 minutes, and he came. Caleb got angry at me for leaving work late without telling him. He said, "Whenever you have a late shift, text me. I can't have you go home alone." Then he said that the guy that used to come to the shop may be the stalker. I couldn't tell him that Dan is actually a nice guy and we hung out together, so I ignored it. Caleb stayed at my place for 2 nights and insisted that I must text him whenever I work late shifts. After a couple of days, one of my coworkers named Liz came to my place. We sat and she suddenly said, "I didn't know that you smoke, Milla. The smell is so strong here." I told her that I don't smoke, and maybe the smell is coming from one of the neighbors. After Liz's remark, I started to notice many weird things happening at my apartment. Many of my things went missing and showed up after days. I thought it was caused by stress of the exams, so I brushed it off. One night, I heard a loud banging noise coming from the living room. I was so scared, but got out of bed and went there to see. I opened the main door, but there was nothing. I went back to my room and texted Caleb about what happened. He replied that I'm overthinking and maybe the noise came from one of the neighbors. I got upset by his text. I was hoping that he would come and stay over. So I decided to invite Dan. I sent him a message, but there was no reply. I tried to call him, but also he didn't pick up. I thought that it was weird since he always answers his phone, but maybe he didn't have battery left in his phone or something. I went to sleep that night. In the morning, I went to work. When I arrived there, one of my coworkers said, "Did Caleb tell you anything about why he quit work?" I was shocked Caleb quit. Why? He didn't tell me anything. I immediately texted him, but there was no reply. I spent the whole shift worried about him and called several times, but still no answer. I didn't know if he had friends outside the coffee shop. He never mentioned anyone. I decided to text Dan and tell him this, even though he hated Caleb. But surprisingly, still there was no reply from Dan too. What happened? Did the two of them just disappear? And at the same time? Why? I was upset by what happened. Liz saw how upset I was. And then she said she's going to stay at my place and we could watch some movies, have fun, and forget about the boys' drama. So we went home together and stayed up until a late hour. In the middle of the night, we heard the same loud banging noise. I looked at Liz and she was terrified too. We carefully got outside my room and went to check the house, but nothing was there. We also checked the hallways, but they were dead empty. We decided to sleep with the lights on and investigate in the morning. The next day, as I was taking the trash outside, I saw my neighbor. She was an old woman. I greeted her and she did the same and said, "Your boyfriend is a nice guy, but he always asks me how I'm doing when he gets out at noon." What? I froze. "What boyfriend?" I asked. She said, "Oh, the one with the dark hair. I always see him leaving the apartment at noon." I freaked out. I ran, terrified, to the apartment to see Liz. She looked confused. I shouted at her, "Someone has been breaking into my apartment for days." I quickly explained to her what the old lady had said, and we called the cops. When they arrived, I explained to them what the old lady said, and they searched the whole apartment and found nothing. I was shocked. How and who? As the police were still in the apartment, I noticed that the big painting in the living room was tilted. I reached to fix it, but to my horror, I saw a creak from the side. So I moved it a little, and I let out a loud scream. The police officers and Liz rushed to me, and when they saw, their jaws literally dropped. There was a huge hole in the wall. In that hole were a few clothes, bed sheets, and a bag. They searched the bag and found a wallet with an ID. To my shock, it was Caleb's ID. Everyone was shocked. The police then said that the person who was living in the wall must stay there for a long time, since there was a lot of cigarettes and empty food cans. Then they said they will make sure to arrest Caleb and take good care of this case, since it was very dangerous and no one knew his intentions. I was terrified. Caleb, the nice guy, was a psycho who lived in my wall. They asked us many questions about him. Turned out that we barely knew anything about him. When Liz mentioned to them the fight incident at the coffee shop was the first time Caleb got violent, they said they will check the tape and see if they can get anything from it. I decided to stay at Liz's apartment until they arrest him. That same day, I got a phone call from the police. They said that they watched the tape and saw something shocking. During the fight, they saw Dan taking something out of Caleb's pocket and they zoomed to see. It was his ID. I was terrified. Then the police said that Dan must be the one they're looking for, and he wanted to frame Caleb. After a couple of days, Caleb showed up. He said that he went to a nearby city to his sick grandma. She was on the verge of dying, and that's why he didn't have his phone with him, and apologized for the sudden disappearance. Caleb was shocked by what we told him about Dan. He said, "I knew it. That guy was psycho. He was watching you the whole time with the dirtiest look on his face." Caleb told me that he was protecting me the whole time. And when I hit him with the car, he said he was coming to talk to me, but I didn't see him. As for now, I go to a psychiatrist to recover from that traumatic experience. And I quit my job. And I'm waiting for the police to find Dan and arrest him.